Welcome to the series First Love by author Ivan Turgenev. Let's listen together. The party had long since ended. The clock struck 12:30. In the room remained only the host, Sergei Nikolaevich, and Vladimir Petrovich. The host rang the bell and ordered the remains of supper to be cleared away. "And so we agreed," he said, settling comfortably into the armchair and lighting a cigar, "that each of us would tell the story of his first love. It's your turn, Sergei Nikolaevich." Sergei Nikolaevich, a short, stout man with a round, fair face, first looked at the host, then raised his eyes to the ceiling. "I have no first love," he said at last. "I began with the second." "How can that be?" "Very simply. At 18, I first courted a young and charming girl, but I pursued her as though it were nothing new. And with the others who came after, it was the same. Strictly speaking, the first and last person I loved was my nurse when I was 6. But that was long ago. I can't remember the details, and even if I did, who would care to hear them?" "Well then, what about me?" said the host. "My first love was nothing remarkable either. I never loved anyone until I met Anna Nikolaevna, my wife, that is, and everything went as smoothly as possible. Our parents arranged the meeting, we fell in love at once, and married soon after. My story can be told in a few words. To tell the truth, when I proposed the topic of first love, I was counting on you two. Doubt that you're old, but certainly not very young anymore. Vladimir Petrovich, perhaps you can enliven the mood." "My first love," said Vladimir Petrovich, hesitating slightly, his dark hair already streaked with grey, "was certainly not an ordinary one." "Ah!" exclaimed both the host and Sergei Nikolaevich at once. "All the better, tell us." "If you wish. But no, I'd rather not. I don't know how to tell a story properly. I'd make it either too dry and bare, or else over-embellished. If you agree, I'll write down everything I still remember and read it to you." At first, his friends protested, but Vladimir Petrovich insisted on his way. 2 weeks later, they met again, and Vladimir Petrovich kept his promise. His manuscript was the following story. I was 16. The events took place in the summer of 1833. I lived in Moscow with my parents. They owned a small country house near the Kaluga Gate, facing the Neskuchny Gardens. I was preparing to enter the university, though I studied little and without enthusiasm. I was perfectly free, no one paid any attention to me. I did whatever I pleased, all the more so since I had just parted from my last tutor, a Frenchman who could never quite reconcile himself to having fallen into Russia comme une bombe, like a bomb, and who now lay in bed for days, crushed and sulking. My father, a kind and easygoing man, indulged me in everything. My mother hardly noticed me at all, though I was their only child. Her mind was occupied with other things. My father, still young and very handsome, had married my mother solely for her money. She was 10 years his senior. She led a sorrowful life, always irritable, jealous, and fretful, though only in my father's absence. She feared him greatly while he was always stern, cold, and distant. I have never since met anyone so calm, so self-assured, and so commanding. I shall never forget those first weeks in the country. The weather was splendid. We left the city on the 9th of May, St. Nicholas's Day. I wandered about our garden, in the Neskuchny Gardens, and often beyond the city gates. I used to carry books, for instance, Meidanov's textbooks, but I rarely opened them. More often I recited poetry aloud. I knew many verses by heart, with youthful ardor surging in my veins and a heart full of sweet melancholy. I lived in faith and hope. I trembled at some vague expectation and rejoiced in everything around me. My imagination fluttered wildly, like swallows circling a church tower at dawn. I dreamed, I grieved, and sometimes wept. But through my tears and sadness, stirred by a tender line of poetry or the beauty of a sunset, the sweet vitality of youth and life still shone through, like the green of spring grass. I had a horse of my own. I used to saddle it myself and ride for hours, galloping at full speed, imagining myself a knight in some great tournament. How joyfully the wind brushed my face, and when I lifted my eyes, I drank in the cool blue splendor of the sky with my open soul. I remember that the image of a woman, the face of love, seldom formed distinctly in my mind. Yet I thought of her vaguely, and somewhere deep within me there stirred a shy foreboding of something new, something infinitely sweet and graceful. That premonition, that hope, filled my whole being. I breathed it in, it coursed through my veins. It was destiny, soon to be fulfilled. The place where we spent the summer consisted of a wooden house and 2 small cottages. In one of them, to the left, there was a workshop for cheap wallpaper. I had more than once wandered that way and seen about a dozen pale, weary, ill-clad children jumping upon wooden levers to press the printing blocks that stamped out the paper patterns. The cottage to the right stood empty. One day, 3 weeks after May 9th, the curtains of that house were drawn up, and women's faces appeared at the windows. A family had moved in. I remember that very evening at dinner my mother asked the steward about our new neighbors, and when she heard the name Princess Zasiekin, she assumed an air of respect. "Ah, a princess," she said, "but I suppose a poor one?" "They came in a hired carriage," the steward replied respectfully, handing her a dish. "They have no horses of their own, and their furniture is very shabby." "Ah," said my mother, "so much the better." My father cast her a cold glance, and she fell silent. The Princess Zasiekin could certainly not have been rich. Her house was too small and shabby, and with its sloping roof, it was hardly fit for anyone with even moderate means. Yet these remarks were soon forgotten. The princely title left no impression on me. I was reading The Robbers by Schiller. I had the habit of wandering in the garden every evening in search of crows. I bore a long-standing grudge against those clever, greedy birds. On the day in question, as usual, I strolled through the garden. After patrolling all the paths without success, the crows had recognized me and were cawing mockingly from afar. I happened to approach a low fence dividing our estate from a narrow strip of garden that stretched all the way to the small house on the right, which belonged to that house. Suddenly I heard a voice. I looked over the fence, and as if struck by lightning, I stood motionless, spellbound. A few paces away on the grass amid green raspberry bushes stood a tall, slender girl in a pink striped dress, a white kerchief tied around her hair. 4 young men surrounded her, and she held in her hand a bunch of greyish flowers, tapping each of them on the forehead in turn. I did not know the name of those flowers, though every child surely did. They looked like little pouches, and when struck against something hard, they popped with a crack. The young men eagerly bent their foreheads toward her, and her manner, I could see only half her face, held something indescribably charming, proud, gentle, teasing, and graceful. So enchanting that I was on the verge of crying out in admiration and joy. I thought that at that moment I would gladly have given up everything in the world just to have those delicate fingers strike my forehead once. My gun slipped from my hands into the grass. I forgot everything else. I devoured her with my eyes. The graceful curves of her figure, the lovely neck, the charming arms and the locks of hair, slightly dishevelled beneath the white kerchief. Her mischievous eyes half closed the eyelashes and the soft cheeks below them. "Hey, little boy, a sudden voice sounded beside me. Is it proper for you to stare so hard at a young lady you don't even know?" I started and flushed with shame. Standing near me on the other side of the fence was a man with closely cropped black hair, looking at me with a mocking expression. At that very moment, the girl turned around. I saw a pair of large grey eyes in a lively, radiant face, and a sudden burst of laughter flashed across that face, revealing for an instant a row of pearly teeth and eyebrows arched in mischievous amusement. I turned crimson, snatched up my gun, and ran back to my room, pursued by the echo of her bright, gentle laughter. I threw myself on the bed and buried my face in my hands. My heart was beating wildly. I was both ashamed and overjoyed. I felt a happiness I had never known before. After a while I rested, combed my hair, washed my face, and went downstairs for tea. Her image floated before my eyes. My heart no longer throbbed as violently, but was filled with a sweet and commanding sense of rapture. "Are you all right?" my father asked at once. "Did you manage to kill a crow?" I nearly told him everything, but restrained myself and only smiled silently. When I was about to go to bed, I turned around 3 times. I don't know why. On one leg, rubbed wax into my hair, got into bed, and slept like a spinning top all night long. Toward dawn I awoke, lifted my head in a rush of excitement, looked around, and immediately fell asleep again. The first thought that came to me when I awoke was, how can I get acquainted with them? Before breakfast I took a walk in the garden, not venturing too near the fence, and met no one. After breakfast I walked back and forth several times past their house, glancing toward the windows. When I thought I saw her behind the curtain, I grew frightened and hurried away. Still, I must get to know her, I thought, pacing aimlessly over the sandy paths near Neskuchny Park. But how? That is the question. Every detail of our meeting the day before, the way she laughed at me, remained vividly alive in my mind for some reason. While I was racking my brains, fate itself was preparing an opportunity for me. During my absence, my mother had received a letter from our new neighbour. It was written on grey paper and sealed with brown wax, the sort of wax used for post office notices or the corks of cheap wine bottles. In a simple, unpolished hand, the princess humbly begged for my mother's assistance. According to her, my mother was acquainted with many influential and noble people who might determine the fate of her family. "I have the honor," she concluded, "of addressing you as one lady to another." The princess expressed her wish to call upon my mother. My mother hesitated and was displeased, for my father was away from home and she had no one to consult. It was impossible not to respond to a lady, and especially a princess. Yet she did not know how to reply. To write in French seemed inappropriate. Her Russian, on the other hand, was full of spelling mistakes, and she disliked exposing her weakness. When I appeared, she was delighted and immediately sent me across to the princess's house with a message that my mother was always happy to be of service within her means, and that she would be pleased to receive the princess at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. My secret wish had been granted more quickly than I could have dreamed. I was both happy and confused. Nevertheless, trying not to betray my inner agitation, I went to my room, and the first thing I did was change my cravat and put on a tailcoat. At home, I still wore short jackets and turned-down collars, though I detested them. I entered the house, my hands and legs trembling. On a narrow, cluttered hallway, I came across an old servant with silver hair, a reddish-bronze complexion, small piggish eyes full of irritation, and deep furrows across his forehead and temples, unlike anything I had ever seen. In his hand was a plate holding the remains of a half-eaten herring. While kicking a door shut with his foot, he glared at me and barked, "What do you want? Is Princess Zasyekin at home?" I asked. "Vonifati!" came a shrill woman's voice from inside. Without a word, He turned his back to me, revealing the worn-out tail of his uniform with a single, faded red button still clinging to it. He set the plate down on the floor and walked away. "Have you gone to the police station yet?" The same sharp voice rang out. He mumbled something unintelligible. "Hey, someone's here, isn't there?" she called again. "Oh, it's our young neighbour. Then let him in." "Please come into the sitting room," the old servant said, returning to pick up the plate. Containing my nervous excitement, I stepped inside. The room was small and not particularly clean. The furniture was shabby, thrown together in disorder as if someone had hurriedly tossed it in. By the window, in a worn-out armchair, sat a woman of about 50, bare-headed, unattractive, wearing a green dress with a striped woolen shawl draped around her neck. Her tiny black eyes stared at me intently. I approached and bowed. "I have the honor of greeting Princess Zasyekin." "I am Princess Zasyekin, and you are the son of Mr. V, are you not?" "Yes, ma'am. I bring my mother's message to you." "Sit down. Vonifati, where are my keys? Have you seen them?" I conveyed my mother's reply to Princess Zasyekin. She listened, drumming her plump, red fingers on the windowsill, and when I had finished speaking, she looked me over once again. "Very good, I shall come," she said at last. "But you seem so very young. May I ask, how old are you?" 16, I stammered. The princess pulled out several grimy, folded scraps of paper covered in writing, held them close to her nose, and began to read. Suddenly she exclaimed, "A lovely age!" shifting in her chair. "And please feel entirely at home here. I'm not one for ceremony or pretensions." "Indeed," I thought to myself, glancing at her unrefined appearance with a disgust I could barely suppress. At that very moment, a door suddenly opened, and standing in the doorway was the young girl I had seen yesterday in the garden. Her hand was raised, and a mocking smile lit up her face. "This is my daughter," said the princess, nodding toward her. "Zinochka, this is the son of our neighbour, Mr. V. And tell me, young man, what is your name?" "Vladimir," I answered, rising to my feet, my voice trembling with excitement. "And your father's name?" "Petrovitch." "Ah, I once knew a police commissioner named Vladimir Petrovitch as well. Vonifati! Never mind the keys, they're right here in my pocket." The young lady still regarded me with the same mocking smile, her eyelids fluttering gently as she tilted her head to one side. "I've met Monsieur Voldemar," she began. Her silvery, bell-like voice sent a shiver through me. "May I call you that?" "Yes," I stammered awkwardly. "Where did you meet?" her mother asked. The young princess did not reply. "Are you busy?" she said, still fixing her gaze on me. "Oh, no. Would you be kind enough to help me untangle some wool? Come this way." She nodded lightly and left the room. I followed her. The room we entered was furnished somewhat better and arranged with more taste. Yet, to be honest, at that moment I was incapable of noticing any of it. I moved as if in a dream, filled through and through with a wild, foolish happiness. Princess Zasyekin paid my mother the promised visit, and made a rather poor impression. I was not at home at the time, but over dinner my mother told my father that the princess was une femme très vulgaire, a very coarse woman, who quite exhausted her patience by begging her to draw the attention of Prince Sergei, with whom it seemed the princess had some entanglement. She appeared to be involved in numerous shady dealings and lawsuits, de vilaines affaires d'argent, and was clearly the sort of person who invited trouble and delighted in litigation. My mother added, however, that she had invited the princess and her daughter to dine with us the next day. I lowered my head over my plate at the mention of the daughter, since, after all, they were our neighbours and of noble birth. At this point, my father remarked that he remembered her husband. In his youth, he had known the late Prince Zasyekin, a man of good family, but reckless and eccentric. He had been nicknamed Le Parisien because he had lived for a long time in Paris. He was once very wealthy but squandered his fortune gambling, and for some obscure reason, probably money, though he might have chosen more wisely, if that were the case, my father added with a faint smile, he had married the daughter of a broker, and after their wedding had engaged in speculation until he was ruined. "I only hope she doesn't come to borrow money," my mother said. "She probably will," my father replied calmly. "Does she speak French?" "Very poorly." Well, it doesn't matter. You said you invited the daughter too. I've heard she's quite charming and refined." "Ah, then she's nothing like her mother." "Nor her father," my father agreed. He was an educated man, but utterly reckless. My mother sighed and fell into thought. My father said no more. I felt uneasy throughout the entire conversation. After dinner, I went for a walk in the garden without my gun. I swore to myself that I would not go near the Zasyekin's side of the fence, yet an irresistible force drew me in that direction, and not without reward. Before I even reached the fence, I saw Zinaida. She was alone this time. Holding a book, she walked slowly along the path, absorbed in reading. She did not notice me. I almost let her pass by, but suddenly I changed my mind and coughed softly. She turned, but did not stop walking. Raising one hand to adjust the wide blue ribbon of her round straw hat, she looked at me, smiled faintly, then bent her eyes again to her book. I took off my hat, and after a moment's hesitation, walked away with a heavy heart. Que suis-je pour elle? I wondered to myself in French, God knows why. Footsteps I knew so well sounded behind me. I turned. My father was approaching, his stride brisk and light. "Is that the young princess?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "Oh, so you know her?" "I met her this morning at their house." My father stopped short, turned neatly on his heel, and retraced his steps. When he came abreast of Zinaida, he bowed. She, too, greeted him, with a hint of surprise crossing her face, and dropped her book. I saw at once the way she looked at him. Though my father was always impeccably dressed, simple yet distinguished in manner, I had never before seen him appear so elegant, nor his grey hat sit so gracefully upon the slightly thinning curls of his hair. I spent the whole evening and the following day in weariness and gloom. I remember trying to study, opening my Meidanov textbook, but the bold letters and printed pages of that famous book danced before my eyes without meaning. I must have read the sentence, "Julius Caesar was distinguished for his valor in battle," a dozen times. It made no sense to me, and at last I pushed the book aside. Before dinner, I again smoothed wax through my hair, and once more put on my tailcoat and tied my cravat. "Why are you wearing that coat?" my mother asked. "You're not even a university student yet, and heaven knows whether you'll pass the exam, and your new frock coat was only just made. You can't go ruining your things like that." "But, Mother, we're having guests today," I murmured almost in despair. "Nonsense! What guests?" I had to obey her. I changed the tailcoat for the new frock coat, though I stubbornly kept the cravat. The princess and her daughter arrived half an hour early. The princess wore the same green dress I had seen before, but now with a yellow shawl and an old-fashioned hat, adorned with ribbons as red as fire. She began at once to talk about her financial troubles, lamenting her poverty and hinting broadly for assistance, yet she seemed perfectly at ease, as if in her own home. She sniffed snuff noisily, fidgeted in her chair, shifting and wriggling as was her habit. It seemed she never once remembered she was a princess. Zinaida, on the other hand, was grave, almost haughty. She was every inch the true princess. Her face was calm, proud, immobile. There was no trace of the smiles or glances I had come to know, yet I thought her more beautiful than ever in this new, distant manner. She wore a thin barège dress patterned with blue flowers. Her hair fell in small English-style curls along her cheeks, an arrangement that suited perfectly her cool expression. My father sat beside her at dinner, treating her with his usual refined and gentle courtesy. From time to time he glanced at her. She glanced at him too, but strangely, almost with hostility. They conversed in French, and I remember being startled by the clarity and purity of her accent. Meanwhile, the princess remained as unrestrained as ever, talking loudly, eating heartily, and praising every dish. My mother was clearly weary of her, answering with brief politeness, my father's brow occasionally furrowed in faint displeasure. My mother disliked Zinaida as well. "So proud, so affected," she said, the next day. "And really, what has she to be proud of examine de grisette?" "My dear," my father said quietly, "I doubt you've ever met a grisette." "Thank heaven, no." "Indeed, thank heaven," he replied dryly. "Then how do you know what they look like?" Zinaida had paid not the slightest attention to me. When dinner ended, the princess rose to go. "I shall rely upon your kindness, dear Maria Nikolaevna, dear Pyotr Vassilitch," she said plaintively to my parents. "I can do no otherwise. My time is past. I am a lady of rank, and yet so poor I can scarcely put food on the table." My father bowed respectfully and escorted her to the great hall. I stood there, awkward in my short frock coat, staring down at the floor like a condemned man awaiting his sentence. The way Zinaida had ignored me had broken my heart. But how astonished I was when, as she passed by me, she whispered quickly in my ear, with that familiar gleam in her eyes, "Come to see me at 8 o'clock tonight, will you? Don't forget." I raised both hands in amazement, but she was already gone, her white scarf fluttering behind her. Exactly at 8 o'clock in the evening, dressed in my tailcoat and with my hair neatly brushed into a tuft, I stepped into her hallway. The old servant, squinting at me from the bench where he sat, rose reluctantly. Laughter and cheerful voices drifted out from the drawing-room. I opened the door and almost fell back in astonishment. Right in the middle of the room stood the princess on a chair, holding a man's hat. Around the chair crowded half a dozen people. They were all reaching for the hat she held aloft and shook teasingly. Seeing me, she cried out, "Wait, wait! We have a guest! He must have a ticket too!" Then, lightly jumping down from the chair, she took hold of my shirt sleeve. "Come here," she said. "Why are you just standing there? Messieurs, allow me to introduce. This is Monsieur Voldemar, the son of our neighbor. And these," she continued, turning to me and pointing at each guest in turn, "Count Malevsky, Doctor Lushin, the poet Meidanov, retired Captain Nirmatsky, and the cavalry officer Byelovzorov, whom you've already met. I hope you will all become good friends." I was so confused that I didn't bow to anyone. I recognized Doctor Lushin as the dark-complexioned man who had, without the slightest mercy, humiliated me in the garden the other day. The others I didn't know. "Count," Zinaida went on, "write Monsieur Voldemar a ticket." "That's not fair," protested the Count, in his slightly Polish accent. He was a handsome, fashionably dressed man with brown hair, expressive dark eyes, a delicate nose, and a thin moustache over a small mouth. "This gentleman has never yet played our game of forfeit." "Not fair," echoed Byelovzorov, the man introduced as the retired captain. He was about 40, pockmarked, with tightly curled hair like a Negro's, broad-shouldered, bow-legged, wearing a military coat without epaulets or buttons. "I said write him a ticket," the princess repeated. "Why rebel? Monsieur Voldemar is here for the first time. No rules apply to him. Complaining is useless. I want you to write him a ticket." The Count shrugged. but obediently lowered his head, took up the pen with his ring-covered fingers, tore off a small piece of paper, and wrote on it. "At least we should explain to Monsieur Voldemar," began Lushin with a mocking tone. "Otherwise he'll have no idea what's going on. You see, we are playing forfeit. The princess must pay a penalty, and whoever draws the lucky ticket wins the honor of kissing her hand. Do you understand me?" I could only stare at him blankly, still frozen in bewilderment, while the princess once again jumped up onto the chair and waved the hat. Everyone reached up for it, and I did the same. "Meidanov," said the princess to the tall, thin-faced young poet with narrow, brooding eyes and long black hair, "you should be generous and give your ticket to Monsieur Voldemar so that he might have twice the chance." But Meidanov shook his head, tossing his hair. I was the last to reach into the hat and unfold my ticket. My God, I cannot imagine what I looked like when I read the word kiss. Kiss, I couldn't help shouting aloud. "Bravo, you've won," the princess said quickly. "How delightful." She stepped down from the chair and gave me a sweet glance that made my heart leap. "Do you like that?" she asked. "Me?" I stammered. "Sell me your ticket," growled Byelovzorov, suddenly in my ear. "I'll pay 100 rubles." In answer, I looked at the furious cavalryman with such alarm that Zinaida clapped her hands while Lushin exclaimed, "He's a good boy." "But as master of ceremonies," Lushin continued, "it's my duty to see that the rules are followed. Monsieur Voldemar, kneel on one knee. That's the rule." Zinaida stood before me, her head slightly tilted as if to see me better, and solemnly extended her hand. My eyes filled with tears. Instead of kneeling on one knee, I dropped to both and clumsily pressed my lips to her fingers, so awkwardly that her sharp nail grazed my lip. "Well done!" cried Lushin, helping me to my feet. The game of forfeit continued. Zinaida made me sit beside her. She invented one delightful forfeit after another. One of them was her pretending to be a statue, choosing the formidable Malevsky as her pedestal, making him bend over with his head tucked to his chest. Never for a moment was there silence or boredom. For me, a boy raised in the solitude of a stately mansion, the boisterous noise, the reckless gaiety, this whirl of strangers was dizzying. My head spun as though I were drunk. I began to laugh and shout louder than the others, so much so that the old princess, who, though she claimed that nothing could disturb her peace, eventually came in from the adjoining room, entered, clearly just to look at me. But I was too happy to care about anything, too lost in my joy to notice the curious or suspicious looks around me. Zinaida continued to show me favor and kept me near her. In another forfeit, I had to sit beside her under a silk scarf and whisper my secret into her ear. I remember our heads close together in the warm, fragrant darkness, her sparkling eyes so near, the soft breath of her parted lips, the gleam of her teeth, the teasing brush of her hair. It all made me tremble with delight. I stayed silent. She smiled mischievously and whispered, "Come now, tell me." But I only blushed and burst out laughing, turning away to catch my breath. We grew tired of forfeit and began playing with string. Oh, how happy I was when by accident she struck my finger, and later when she deliberately missed, teasing me instead of touching my hand. What didn't we do that evening? We played piano, sang, danced, and even pretended to be gypsies. Malevsky dressed as a bear and was forced to drink salt water. Count Malevsky performed card tricks and ended by dealing himself all the trumps, earning the honor of congratulations from Lushin. Meidanov read aloud a few passages from his poem, The Manslayer. Romanticism was then at its height, which he intended to publish with a black cover and blood-red title. We hid his hat and made him dance a Cossack tune to redeem it. We made old Vonifati wear a woman's bonnet, while the princess donned a man's hat. I cannot recount everything we did. Only Byelovzorov withdrew more and more into the background, grumbling and seething with jealousy. At times, his eyes seemed bloodshot, his face purple with anger. It looked as if he might spring at us any moment. But one glance from the princess, one gentle wag of her finger, and he retreated into his corner again. At last, we were all exhausted. Even the elder princess, fearless as she claimed to be and saying that no noise could ever bother her, finally grew tired and desired quiet. At midnight, supper was served, a piece of dry, hard cheese, a few turnovers with thin slices of ham. To me, more delicious than any pastry I had ever tasted. There was only one bottle of wine, and a strange one at that. Dark glass, wide-necked, with a pinkish hue. Yet no one drank. Weary and weak with happiness, I went home. As we parted, Zinaida pressed my hand warmly and once again smiled her mysterious smile. The night air was heavy and damp upon my fevered face. A storm seemed to be gathering. Large black clouds swelled and crawled slowly across the sky, their grey, smoky edges shifting visibly. A trembling wind shivered through the dark trees, and somewhere, far off on the horizon, thunder muttered faintly in anger. I went up to my room by the back stairs. The old butler was asleep on the floor. I had to step over him. He woke, saw me, and said that my mother had grown angry again and wanted to summon me home, but my father had stopped her. I never went to bed without bidding my mother good night, but now it was too late. I told the servant I would undress myself and go to bed, then blew out the candle. But I did not undress, and I did not go to bed. I sat in my chair for a long, long time, as if under a spell. What I felt was new and sweet beyond words. I sat motionless, barely breathing, smiling quietly at certain memories, or shivering when I realized that I was in love, that it was she, that this was love itself. Zinaida's face floated before me in the darkness, radiant, unyielding, her lips still curled in that enigmatic smile, her dreamy, tender eyes watching me just as they had at our parting. At last I rose, tiptoed to bed, and lay down carefully, afraid that a sudden movement might disturb what possessed my soul. I lay there without closing my eyes. Soon I noticed a faint, unceasing glow seeping through the window. I sat up and looked out. The frame of the window and its panes were dimly visible, eerie and pale. A storm, I thought. And indeed it was, but raging far away, so that no thunder could be heard. Only pale, tangled flashes, long, branching streaks of lightning, quivered over the sky, not flashing, but writhing, fluttering like the wings of a dying bird. I stood there until dawn. The lightning never ceased, not for a moment. The peasants call such a night the night of the shining birds. I gazed intently at the silent fields, the dark mass of the Neskuchny garden, the faint yellow facades of distant houses trembling with each ghostly gleam. I gazed and could not turn away. Those silent, flickering lights seemed to echo the mysterious fire that burned within me. Dawn broke, the sky glowed in patches of purple. As the sun drew nearer, the lightning grew fainter, then stopped. The trembling lights waned and finally vanished, lost in the brightness of a new day, and my storm of lightning faded too. I felt weary, yet peaceful. But Zinaida's image still shimmered gloriously in my soul. Yet even that image seemed gentler now, like a swan rising from the reeds and mud. She stood apart from all that was coarse around her. And as I drifted into sleep, I bowed before her vision, parting from her in tender devotion. Oh, the sweetness of those feelings, the harmonious calm, the goodness and serenity of a gentle heart, the overflowing joy of love's first blissful rapture. Where are they now? Where have they gone? The next morning, when I came downstairs for tea, my mother scolded me, though not as harshly as I had feared, and I had to give an account of the previous evening. I spoke briefly, omitting many details, trying to make everything seem innocent and harmless. In any case, they are not comme il faut people, my mother remarked, and you have no business lingering around that place. You'd better spend your time preparing for your exams instead. Realizing that she spoke only out of concern for my studies, I felt no need to argue. But when the tea was over, my father took my arm, led me into the garden, and made me tell him everything I had seen at the Zasyekins' house. My father had a strange influence over me, and our relationship was equally strange. He hardly ever concerned himself with my studies, yet he never made me unhappy. He respected my freedom, treated me, if I may put it this way, with a kind of courteous detachment. Only he never allowed me to come too close. I loved my father, I admired him. He was the very model of a man, and in heavens, had I not always felt that deliberate distance he kept between us, I would have adored him passionately. Yet with a single word, a single gesture, he could inspire boundless trust in me. With my heart wide open, I would tell him everything as though to a wise friend or a kindly teacher, and then suddenly he would withdraw, gently and affectionately, but still withdraw. Sometimes my father was in high spirits, willing to play with me like a boy. He loved vigorous physical activity. Once, it never happened again, he caressed me so tenderly that I nearly burst into tears. But that warmth vanished as suddenly as it came, leaving nothing to hold on to, as if it had all been a dream. At times I would gaze at his handsome, noble face, and my heart would swell, my soul yearning to give itself to him completely. My father seemed to sense it. He would gently stroke my cheek, and then walk away or turn to something else, or suddenly grow cold in that peculiar way only he possessed, and I too would shrink back and become cold. Those fleeting moments of affection never came in response to my silent, hopeful pleas. They always happened unexpectedly. Later, when I thought about his character, I concluded that he never shared his inner world or family life with me. His heart was attached elsewhere, and his satisfaction was found in other things. Once he told me, "Take what you can from life, let no one rule you, rely only on yourself. That's the true flavor of existence." Another time when I, as a young idealist, began preaching about liberty, he was in one of his kind moods that day, as I used to say, one of those rare times when I could talk to him freely. He repeated my word, liberty. And do you know what brings liberty? What? I asked. Will? One's own will. And will means power, far greater than liberty. Learn to use your will, and you will have liberty, and you will lead. My father, above all, wanted to live, and he did live. Perhaps he sensed that he would not have long to taste the flavor of life. He died at 42. I described in detail my evening at the Zasyekins. Half attentive, half absent-minded, my father sat in a garden chair, listening, idly tracing lines in the sand with his cane. From time to time he burst out laughing, looked at me oddly, and urged me to go on with short questions or brief comments. At first I avoided mentioning her name, Zinaida, but soon I could no longer help myself, and I began praising her. My father still laughed. Then he grew silent, stretched, and stood up. I remembered that before leaving the house, he had ordered the horses to be harnessed. My father was a superb horseman, and long before Rary had mastered the art of taming the wildest stallions. "Shall I go with you, father?" I asked. "No," he replied, and that usual polite, chilly expression returned to his face. "If you like, you may go for a ride yourself, Tell the groom I won't be going." My father turned away and walked off quickly. I watched him disappear behind the gate. I could see his hat moving along the fence. He was heading toward the Zasyekins' house. He stayed there for less than an hour, then went straight into town and did not return home until nightfall. After dinner, I went to the Zasyekins myself. In the drawing room, I found only the princess. Upon seeing me, she scratched under her bonnet with her knitting needle and suddenly asked if I could copy a petition for her. "With pleasure," I said, sitting down on the edge of a chair. "Just make sure the writing is neat and large," the princess said, handing me a dirty sheet of paper. "And could you possibly finish it today?" "Of course, I'll copy it right away," I replied. The door to the next room opened slightly, and through the crack I caught sight of Zinaida's face, pale and thoughtful, her hair flowing loosely down her back. She gazed at me with wide, cold eyes, then quietly closed the door. "Zina, Zina!" the princess called. Zina did not answer. I took the petition home and spent the whole evening copying it. My passion began from that day. At that moment I felt, so I recall, something akin to what a young man must feel when entering military service. From now on I was no longer a mere boy, I was in love. As I have said, my passion began that day. I may add that my suffering began on that very same day. Without Zinaida, I withered and pined away. My mind was empty. I could do nothing properly. All day long I longed for her. When she was absent, I languished. Yet when she was present, I was no better. I was jealous. I was aware of my own insignificance. I sulked or humbled myself foolishly, and at the same time an invisible force drew me to her. I could not help but tremble with joy each time I crossed the threshold of her room. Zinaida immediately guessed that I was in love with her. Indeed, I had never thought of concealing it. She took pleasure in my adoration. She teased, caressed, and tormented me. There is something sweet in being the sole source, the sovereign and irresponsible cause of another person's greatest joy and deepest suffering, and I was like wax in Zinaida's hands. Yet, in truth, I was not the only one who loved her. All the men who frequented her house were madly in love with her, and she held them all bound at her feet. She delighted in awakening hope and fear within them, in ruling them at her whim, while they never dared to dream of resistance and were ready to obey her slightest wish. Her whole being, so full of life and beauty, possessed a peculiar charm, a mixture of mischief and abandon, artifice and simplicity, serenity and gaiety. Everything she said or did bore a certain graceful refinement, in which the power of her individuality revealed itself. Her face, too, was ever-changing, expressing almost simultaneously irony, reverie, and passion. Many fleeting, delicate emotions, shifting as swiftly as the shadows of clouds on a windy summer day, chased one another over her lips and eyes. All her admirers were necessary to her. Byelovzorov, sometimes called my wild beast, and at other times simply mine, would gladly have leapt into the fire for her. Confident in his strength and manly virtues, he constantly asked her to marry him, implying that the others were mere triflers. Meidanov appealed to the poetic side of her nature. Being rather cold, as most writers and poets are, he forced himself to persuade her, and perhaps himself, that he admired her, praising her endlessly in verse. He read his poems aloud to her with great fervor, sometimes pretending affection and sincerity. She sympathized with him, yet mocked him a little. She did not think much of him, and after hearing his verses she made him read Pushkin aloud, to purify the air, as she said. Lushin, the bitter, sarcastic doctor, understood her best of all and loved her most deeply, though he mocked and scolded her to her face and behind her back. She could not help but respect him, but she took delight in tormenting him for it, and sometimes, with a strange and cruel pleasure, she made him feel that even he was at her mercy. "I'm flirtatious, I'm cruel, I was born to act," she said to him one day in my presence. "Well then, hold out your hand, I'll prick it with a needle. You'll be ashamed, because this boy is watching. You'll feel pain, but you, being an honest man, will laugh as if it were nothing." Lushin flushed crimson, turned away, bit his lips, but finally held out his hand. She pricked it, and indeed he began to laugh. And she laughed too, driving the needle in deeper, peering into his eyes that desperately sought to escape. Of all her relations, the connection between Zinaida and Count Malevsky was the hardest to understand. He was handsome, clever, and smooth, but even I, a boy of 16, could see something false, deceitful about him, and I was astonished that Zinaida did not notice. Yet perhaps she did notice and was not repelled. Her irregular upbringing, her acquaintances and their eccentric ways, her mother's constant presence, the poverty and disorder of their home, all this, from the liberty she enjoyed to her awareness of her superiority over those around her, had developed in her a sort of reckless pride mingled with disdain and lack of caution. Anything might happen at any time. The servant Vonifati might announce that there was no road left, some scandalous story might be told, guests might suddenly quarrel. Zinaida would merely shake her curls and say, "What does it matter?" and give it no further thought. Yet even so, my blood sometimes boiled with indignation when Malevsky approached her, sly as a fox, gracefully leaning over the back of her chair, whispering with a satisfied, flattering smile while she folded her arms across her chest, looked at him intently, smiled in return, and shook her head. "Why do you receive Count Malevsky?" I asked her one day. "He has such pretty moustaches," she replied. "But you wouldn't understand that." "Don't think I care for him," she said to me another time. "No, I don't care for those I despise. I need someone who can master me. But thank heaven, I hope never to meet such a man. I don't wish to fall into anyone's claws, no matter what the price." "Then you'll never love anyone?" "And you? Don't I love you?" she said, and tapped the tip of my nose with her gloved finger. Yes, Zinaida amused herself at my expense. For 3 weeks I saw her every day, and there was nothing she did not do to me. She seldom came to our house, but I did not mind. In our home she became a lady, a princess, and I stood in awe. I feared my mother might discover my secret. She disliked Zinaida and kept a close watch on us. I feared my father less. He seemed to take no notice of me. He rarely spoke to Zinaida, yet whenever he did, his conversation was witty and full of hidden meaning. I neglected my studies, stopped reading, even gave up my walks and horseback rides. Like a beetle chained by the leg, I hovered around that dear little house. I would have been happy to stay still, as it were, but I could not. My mother scolded me, and sometimes even Zinaida herself sent me away. Then I would shut myself in my room, or go to the far end of the garden, climb the ruins of an abandoned stone greenhouse, sit swinging my legs over the wall beside the road, and remain there for hours, staring vacantly at nothing. White butterflies fluttered about me and over the dusty nettles. Not far away, a cheerful little bird perched on a red brick fragment, chirping noisily, preening its tail feathers. Crows, still suspicious, occasionally cawed high above on the bare top branches of a birch tree. The gentle wind swayed the leaves. The distant bells of the Donskoy monastery rang faintly, softly, and sadly. And as I sat gazing aimlessly, my heart overflowed with a nameless emotion in which everything was mingled: sorrow, joy, the flavor of the future, the longing and dread of life itself. Yet then I did not understand any of it, nor could I name anything that stirred within me, or perhaps I should have called it all by one single name, Zinaida. Zinaida went on playing her cat and mouse games with me. She would be tender and teasing, and I, torn between delight and torment, would lose myself in her whims. Then she would suddenly drive me away, and I would not dare to approach or even look at her. I remember that for many days she was cold toward me. I was completely crushed, and timidly crept into her house, trying to keep near the princess, though she was then irritable and scolding. Her financial affairs were in disarray, and she had twice had to explain herself to the police. One day, as I wandered in the garden beside the familiar fence, I suddenly saw Zinaida sitting motionless on the grass, her hands supporting her body. I turned to go away quietly, but suddenly she raised her head and beckoned to me. Love was not enough. At first I did not understand her gesture. She beckoned again. I instantly leapt over the fence and ran joyfully toward her, but her look stopped me. She motioned me to the path 2 steps away. Confused and not knowing what to do, I knelt down beside the path. She looked pale, weary with some bitter grief, utterly exhausted. Every line of her face expressed suffering so deep that my heart ached. I stammered unconsciously, "What is the matter?" Zinaida lifted her head, chose a blade of grass, chewed it, and tossed it aside. "You love me dearly, don't you?" she asked at last. "Yes." I did not reply. Indeed, was there any need? "Yes," she repeated, looking at me as before. "That's right. The same eyes," she went on dreamily, hiding her face in her hands. "Everything has become loathsome," she said softly. "I should have gone to the ends of the earth first. I cannot bear it. I cannot overcome it. And what awaits me in the future? Oh, I am so unhappy. Oh God, how unhappy I am." "For what reason?" I asked timidly. Zinaida did not answer. She merely shrugged her shoulders. I remained kneeling, gazing at her in her deep sorrow. Each word she spoke tore at my heart. At that moment, I felt that I could have given my life to spare her pain. I looked at her. Though I did not understand why she was suffering, I vividly imagined her, in her uncontrollable anguish, rushing out into the garden and throwing herself upon the ground, like a stalk cut down by a sickle. Around her the sky was clear. The breeze rustled in the leaves above. Now and then a branch of the raspberry bush swayed over her head. Doves cooed softly. Bees hummed lazily among the sparse blades of grass. The heavens were deep and blue, and I was unspeakably miserable. "Read me some verses," Zinaida said quietly, leaning on her elbow. "I love to hear you read poetry. You read in a monotonous sing-song, but it doesn't matter because you are young. Read On the Hills of Georgia. But first, sit down." I sat down and read On the Hills of Georgia. "The heart cannot choose but love," Zinaida repeated. "That's what is so subtle about poetry. It tells us not what is, but what is truer and better, cannot choose but love. The heart may not wish it, yet it cannot help itself." She fell silent again, then suddenly rose and said, "Come with me. Meidanov is inside with my mother. He has brought some new verses, but I ran away. He is offended. He is sad. I could do no otherwise. Someday you will understand everything, only don't be angry with me." Zinaida hastily seized my hand and ran ahead. We entered the house. Meidanov was preparing to read his freshly written manslayer, but I did not listen. He declaimed and dragged out his lines, the rhymes clinking like little bells, loud and meaningless, while I watched Zinaida trying to fathom the meaning of her last words. "Perhaps some unknown rival has suddenly conquered you?" Suddenly Maidanov's nasal voice rang out, and Zinaida's eyes met mine. She lowered her gaze, and a flush rose on her cheeks. I saw her blush, and a chill of rage ran through me.
I had been jealous before, but only at that instant, in that flashing moment, did the thought strike me that she loved someone else. My God, she is in love! The torment of my heart began at that very moment. I racked my brain, changed my mind, then returned to my original thoughts, secretly following Zinaida closely, though always at a safe distance. She was changing, and it was clear as day. She began to take long, solitary walks, sometimes not receiving visitors at all. She would sit for hours in her room.
Never before had she had such habits. Suddenly, or so it seemed, I felt as if I had boldly intruded into her life. Is it this one, or not? I asked myself, impatiently scanning each of the men who adored her. Count Malevsky particularly caused me unease, though for Zinaida's sake I was too ashamed to admit it. My vigilance achieved nothing and could not be hidden from anyone. In any case, Dr. Lushin had long since perceived it. Yet he too had changed recently. His figure was frail, and although he laughed often, his laughter sounded emptier, more disdainful, shorter, and the involuntary tension replaced the light, gentle irony he once expressed. "Why do you loiter here, young man?" he said to me one day, when only the two of us were left in the Zasiekin drawing-room. The princess had gone for a long walk, and her sharp voice could be heard scolding a maid. "You should be studying at your age. What are you doing here?" "How do you know I am not studying at home?" I answered, somewhat defiantly, but with a hint of hesitation. "Do you think studying like that is too much?" "Well, I don't see anything wrong. At your age it is natural, but you are unfortunate in your choice. Don't you see anything about this household?" "I do not understand you," I replied. "Don't understand? Then all the worse. I feel it is my duty to warn you. A seasoned, solitary man like me may come here safely. Nothing can harm someone experienced like me, but you are still very young. This atmosphere is not good for you. Believe me, it could hurt you." "How so?" I asked. "Well, are you normal at present? Are your feelings healthy?" "What feelings?" I asked. But deep down I knew he was right.
"Ah, young man," the doctor continued, in a tone that made the words feel almost insulting. "Why deny it, thank heaven, when so far all your emotions are written on your face? But why discuss it? I myself should not have come here if—" The doctor pursed his lips. "If I were not a peculiar fellow. What surprises me, though, is this. Why, so intelligent as you are, do you not perceive what is happening?" "But what is happening?" I asked, on alert. The doctor looked at me with mock compassion. "I am far too kind," as if the boy had gained some understanding, he said, almost to himself.
"Honestly, I'll tell you once again," he added, raising his voice. "This atmosphere here is not good for you. You like being here, so be it. The greenhouse pleasant and fragrant, but it is no place to live. That's right. Take my advice. Go home." The princess entered, beginning to complain to the doctor about a toothache. Then Zinaida appeared. "The mother told me to come here," the princess said. "Doctor, you must reprimand her. She drinks ice water all day. Is that good for her? Heaven help for her delicate lungs." "Why do you do that?" Lushin asked. "So what if I do?" "So what? You could catch cold and die." "Really? Are you serious? Very well, then all the better." "Interesting reasoning," the doctor muttered. The princess left the room. "Yes, very interesting," Zinaida repeated. "Life is like a festival? Look around. Life is so beautiful. Or do you think I do not understand, do not feel? Drinking ice water for a little pleasure, can you guarantee that such a fleeting delight is not worth risking for a moment of joy? And that is before we even speak of happiness." All right, Lushin remarked. "Speaking of capriciousness and irresponsibility, these two traits describe your character well." Zinaida laughed with delight. "It's late, doctor. You have poor observation and poor timing. Your gaze is rigid. At present I have no mood for humor. To tease you, or myself, how delightful. And about irresponsibility. You, Voldemar, Zinaida suddenly added, stamping her foot. Don't make that pitiful face. I do not want anyone's pity. She quickly left the room. This atmosphere is very harmful for you, young man, Lushin said to me once again.